All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. This is our professional development webinar hosted by the ACT Research and Theory Division. And today I'm honored to introduce a great team of scholars who will talk to us about strategies for publishing and reviewing theoretical manuscripts. First off, we have Dr. Tristan Johnson, who is Professor, Associate Dean, and Editor-in-Chief for ETR&D. We have Dr. Stephen Yanchar, who is Professor at Brigham Young University. And we have Dr. Enilda Romero-Hall, who is Associate Professor at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I will be moderating the presentation today. I'll take a look at the chat to see if you have any questions. And I am Lucas Vasconcelos, Assistant Professor at University of South Carolina. All right, the floor is yours.
So one of us
Who would like to go first?
conversation.
Yeah.
I guess it's not, since I unmuted my mic, I will go first. So we got a few questions to kind of guide our comments for this panel, but of course we want to make it as conversational as possible. So I'll share some of my experiences publishing theoretical manuscripts. So I'd probably say that for me, one of the very first experiences was when I was working on my dissertation. And the way that kind of got started was that I was bringing different theories and frameworks into my doctoral dissertation, and I had to find a way to connect these different frameworks together. And I would say that probably one of the best pieces of advice that I got from my doctoral advisor, Dr. Ginger Watson, was you're probably never going to have as much time to read as when you are on your doctoral dissertation. So I took that to heart, and I read as much as possible in each area that I was exploring in my dissertation. And that kind of allowed me to create an outline in which I was exploring all of these different frameworks, but I was finding, I was creating connections between them. And I actually went back to my dissertation today, and the literature review, I don't know where this stands in other people's standards, but it was an 80-page section of my dissertation, and I ended up publishing one section entirely as a journal article manuscript and another section as a book chapter. So I think one of the things that I would say, reflecting back on that experience, was that, again, it was about creating connections between different frameworks and concepts. It was, the idea was to bring light to new ideas that had not previously been formulated in the literature, and just kind of bringing a different perspective to it. And that took some time to kind of like think about the basic arguments, operationalize the definitions, and then trying to organize the literature in a way that was cohesive, that it was, again, bringing a new theory, new concept to light. So I will stop there and then give other panelists an opportunity to share their thoughts and ideas, because I know that we all come from different perspectives too. So.
Dr. Johnson, you muted.
Okay, I think I'm back. Okay, I don't know. Anyway, let me open my share tray again. Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you
Right.
and we can see the slides.
All right, good enough, thanks. Okay, so I think this topic is actually very apropos, and I've come across this many times, and I'm happy to share some ideas. It's not a common topic because a lot of people don't pursue this line of scholarship. Nonetheless, I'm pulling a couple select slides, so if you don't mind. Within ETR&D, there's several sections. I represent the research section, but typical theoretical papers would come to the research section and or be dealt with in some shape or form. One of the things I like, this is a generic slide, by the way. One of the things that I want to point you to is we do have this applied theory and practice. So that is actually noted. We also do look at analytical papers, also lit reviews, to be kind of in that ballpark and so forth. But I want to really point you, one of the challenges that I have in ETR&D is I will get a theoretical paper and I send it out for review, and my reviewers come back and say, we don't accept this. Well, we do accept it, but sometimes it's not known. That's a challenge for me to deal with as the editor. But I do want to point out specifically, every year we host a Young Scholar Award. It was called the Early Career, it's called the Early Career Award also, but it specifically deals with theoretical constructs. And so one of the challenges is finding early career scholars within 0 to 4 or 5 years of getting their PhD or before that. But we do recognize papers that focus on theoretical constructs with the purpose, and the purpose specifically to guide research and or development in our field. We do accept papers that are unpublished. Also, these are papers that deal with theoretical constructs specifically. If we receive a submission, a manuscript that is for the Young Scholar Early Career Award, it's the same competition, they cannot report on a specific research study. That's not the focus at all. They can refer to research that they've done or development that they've done, but the piece is simply theoretical. And we do run into a lot of challenges with that because this is an area that isn't really focused on. Many PhDs are not theoretical constructs. They're typical research papers in our field. And so that becomes a challenge, but we are interested in this here. And so that's one thing to look for. One of the things, I do have kind of a 3 or 4 point bullet points of, okay, how would you get published? Here's what we have for research manuscripts. For theoretical manuscripts, again, what's the purpose for the theoretical focus, or what is it? What's the current state of theories and research in my area? What theory development is needed? So in other words, why is this theoretical piece important? So even though it is different, it's not an actual research study, having the gravitas, having the connection to what's been done in the field is going to be very important. So I wanted to share that with you as a group. I'm going to stop sharing if I can figure out how to stop sharing. I think that did it. And keep in mind, when I look at Europeans, they spend a lot more time, the European development of doctoral students, a lot more time on theory development. We don't do that in the US that I've seen. I wanted to develop some theories and it just wasn't an area But this field of understanding theories and talking about them, I think is very, very valuable to our field as a whole. I think that's the part that's missing. And we do have a way to accept those and process those. I can talk more, but I want to make sure the other presenter, Stephen, specifically, can have a chance to chime in.
Okay, well, thank you. Both presenters so far, I think, said some very helpful, interesting things. And just a little on my perspective, I actually was trained in psychology and not in education, although I now work at a school of education in a department here at BYU in instructional psychology and technology, which I just actually love. It's exhilarating. But my training originally was all in what we call theoretical and philosophical psychology. So I live in a world, and my primary sort of scholarly interests have to do with these very things. And so I just think it's wonderful and very, very important that this session's happening, and that, the things that Tristan just said about making space for and incentivizing theoretical work is just so important, I think, because to me, there's a kind of a theoretical sort of, for lack of a better word, a kind of theoretical capital that it just is to be drawn upon. There's just so many important contributions, and ways in which we move these fields forward is through careful analysis and theorizing. And I just see so many advantages to trying to continue to push our work in this way. And so I have done a lot of stuff in education, also in psychology. I kind of work in both worlds. And I've been the associate editor of 2 different journals in psychology that do a lot of theory stuff. And so I've seen, for the last, I don't know how many years, tons of manuscripts, people trying to develop ideas in different ways. And I think I'll just offer a couple of suggestions on what to me usually are the stronger manuscripts that I see that I end up having to make decisions about. And a couple of quick things here. One is that I think this is similar to what Tristan was saying, that it's very helpful to have the contribution being situated in a kind of historical disciplinary conversation, something that's already taking place, something that you can enter into and help push forward instead of coming in out of the blue. It's harder when you're coming in out of the blue, so to speak, because you have to kind of establish a whole context. And that can take a lot of time on its own. And it takes a lot of work. It's not easy to do that. I think it should be clear what kind of problem or issue that is being addressed that is relevant, that people care about. And you don't have to just be trying to agree with people or maybe in some sense please people, but there should be some, even if you're on a very contrary position, you're taking toward others in a respectful way. It ought to be clear that there's some kind of obvious contribution at foot here at play. And I think one obvious thing that is obvious to me, at least, is that the argumentation needs to be very well developed and supported. But I've seen a lot of manuscripts over the years where they're just filled with opinions and unsupported claims and so on. And I feel like I'm reading a letter to the editor or an op-ed piece or something. And that's really not what they are. And probably the most important kind of grand thing here is that I'd like to see papers that expand our conversations, that are creating new possibilities for us to think about and illuminating issues in a new way. And if you think about some of the really interesting contributions over the years, they're what allow us to see our research questions and our phenomena differently than we did before, and see what we missed, what was hiding in plain sight, or new ways of analyzing data that can be very illuminating. They could be very traditional ways of understanding how we think about learning and cognition, for instance, but then some new movement comes along, like cultural historical activity theory or some feminist movement or something like that. And all of a sudden we realize there's whole ranges of phenomena that we've been missing, that we haven't seen correctly, or that we haven't seen deeply. And I think theory is wonderful at doing this. And so I just a big fan of it and encourage people to push forward trying to do it in ways that can really expand our the range of possibilities of what might be available to us and how we can help others, bless the lives of people around us, and facilitate the work of education. So thank you.
Let me jump in here. If you want to do things differently, Lima, just jump in. In tying to what Stephen was saying, I do see manuscripts come through that are simply lit reviews, and there's a wide I mean, the lit review is done for a specific purpose as a framework for research. I'm going to add on to what Stephen said and Enilda said about kind of their perspectives. With a theoretical construct or a theoretical piece, it's just not a data dump. You're not taking what other people have done and just processing it and presenting this summary of all of their work. Back to that logic piece, the manuscript needs to have strong logic. It needs to have a purpose and a rationale for why it's being presented. That needs to be very, very clear up front, especially since there's different modalities to present these types of work. There's not a strict structure per se, other than what is really not desirable is just to have a summary of what the field is doing. But taking that and extending it, so what? Or even presenting the problem in the front end, like Stephen said, is what's the problem you're working on? Why is there a need for this work? So establishing the need for it, then also synthesizing the work and trying to tie it together and different viewpoints and different purposes or different tie things together to where the field could go or how this could make an impact on the future of the field or in a specific area or domain. So I think not just a synthesis of ideas of what's happened, but then how can it be extended? What's the implications of the study? And I think those are things that oftentimes get overlooked for a research paper when you're doing lit review. Obviously, this is for a specific purpose for that study. But when you're doing a conceptual piece or a theoretical piece, it's usually a little bit broader or could be very narrow, but to really have a clear why is this piece needed? And then again, just not a dump of the data of what other people have said, but then, okay, here's what this means in interpretation and synthesis of ideas. And that is tough. That can be very challenging. And then again, I've seen one paper that was a theoretical piece published for a PhD. That was back in 1999. I don't see many anymore because it is tough work and it's not, when are you done? And then anyway, so those are some ideas just to think about.
If I can jump in here and just add to that, I very much agree with my co-panelists that there's a need to think through an argument or the argument that you're making within your paper, and then kind of organizing the ideas and thoughts that are coming together. I have found that to be extremely challenging. I think that writing a theoretical piece or conceptual piece is significantly, at least in my experience, significantly more complex than thinking through writing a empirical type of manuscript, because there's there's an outline that you can say I can already follow when I'm thinking of writing an empirical piece. Whereas when you're thinking about the thoughts and ideas that are coming together in it have to be thoughts, what literature are you pulling from? And one of the things that, in my experience, I've had is that I really literature that may not necessarily always be in the educational technology literature. Like Stephen was mentioning, there may be a movement or other theoretical new. So you have to be willing to explore literature in other subject areas. And I think that again, takes time. The other thing I wanted to mention, and this was the reviewers and how reviewers interact with theoretical pieces. I found that experience to be very challenging. I've had manuscripts that have been rejected immediately because they don't have a method section.
It seems kind of like it's fading in and out a little bit.
Oh, I apologize for that. I'll let someone else take the turn while I figure out the audio situation. I don't want you to miss out on my comments, sorry.
We received a question in the chat for Stephen, and that is, how do you define theory?
Yes, that's a good question. Asked many, many times in many ways. And so there's not a single definition to it. People come at it from a lot of angles. Probably the classic definition of theory that you'd see in a field that emphasizes empirical research would be something like an explanation of the relationship between two or more variables, or something like that. Like taking account of some kind of cause-effect relationship, what's going on here. I think that's a somewhat narrow view of it. That's one definition I think is viable, but I think there's broader views of theory also that would have more to do with how do we develop ideas that can help us take account of the world around us, right? And like in education, you know, how do we take account of learners learning, learners struggling? How do we take account of the struggles that educators have, and how do we take account of the ways in which people interact with technology to try to achieve some good or something like that? And what are the assumptions that we make about learners and about learning and agency and relationality and so on that can help us better make sense of things? And so I see theory a little more broadly as a set of assumptions and claims about the world that we can develop that will enable us to take account of the phenomena that are of interest to us. So I'm sure there's other good definitions, and I bet there's some panelists here who could say some really good things about that. But that's a couple of thoughts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I actually pulled up a theory that I was working on. Okay, so in my theory work that I've done, I don't know if the best place is to start with developing your own theory. I think it's complicated. I had some mentors that I relied on, but in a theory you have theorems. These are statements, and for example, my team theory that I was working on, that I have in front of me, you have a theorem that's derived from systems dynamics. You have this notion of axioms. You have, I have also theorems derived from different, from machine learning. I have theorems. I have a lot of these theories that are theorems or axioms. These are things that people know or commonly accept, and you're trying to put together a set of ideas that kind of hang together. But what that does is, if there's these theorems or axioms that you propose, by the way, there's also assumptions which you try to recognize as I'm looking through here. But what you're trying to do is establish a series of ideas that come together, and then they can either be proven or they can be proven to support. I mean, you can develop your hypothesis testing from there to prove out specific theorems or assumptions or axioms. Axioms are typically things that are accepted as truth. By the way, this is not a total area, but I think one of the things that you all could probably start with is talk about the theories you know and how they impact your research, and say, what are they telling us, or where there's challenges, or what's the next question? What is not proven or established? And so the theory drives the research, is really how it's supposed to be developed, or they're impacting both back and forth. You have some theorems say, these are what we believe is true, go prove them with your research. By the way, this is the theory becomes kind of like a program, a research program, if you will. And if you're collaborating with others in the field, then you can work on the theory together, or but I find the theories help me to articulate what we know or what we don't know, what we're assuming or what assumptions we're trying to make or trying to prove. And it's a good way to go back and forth. But what I would also say is, and by the way, I posted the link for the Early Career Award. When I tend to find early career scholars that are successful, they usually have one or two or three other scholars on their on the paper that they're going to and getting help. So I think it's good. I think initially I'd suggest if you're going to develop a theoretical construct or a theory type of a paper, then I would probably work with some middle to senior level professors that have a lot of that under their belt, or at least have some experience with that, because it can be frustrating. I was never formally trained on developing theories, to be quite honest. I've had to pick that up on my own, unlike Stephen, who was probably trained in coursework. But I think I often, personally, I downplayed theories and say research is where you're going to get recognized. The challenge is if you can't talk theories and you can't talk ideas, then your research can't be, it's harder to leverage the value of that research and point out where it's impacting or what's it linked to. And so I think that's the critical thought that goes into academic work. And I think that's where, especially as you go into your career and continue to build your career, starting to be mindful of you're doing research for a purpose, not just doing it just to get a paper published. And so I think that's where theory really helps to drive. And then also, theory is intended to bridge, I believe. And so you can talk theoretically about ideas and also build the language. And so I think that can also be very, very important. Anyways, just a couple ideas there.
Okay, can I try my microphone now? Is it better? Okay.
Good.
Okay, sorry. I was talking a little bit about the review process and what that meant for me in the past. And one of the challenges I experienced is submitting to a journal article and having to kind of first experience rejection, right? Because we're so used to journals publishing primarily empirical research, unless there is like a conceptual track in the submission process, or I've been fairly successful in special issues, right? That I found that to be a venue where editors and reviewers tend to be more open to this work. Making it past the the editorial review, then it means there's a lot of explaining to the reviewer what you're doing, and getting initial feedback. I've had reviewers ask me for the method section. And I'm like, this is not one of those papers. So trying to educate the reviewer through the process. But I think overall I've been very fortunate, because once I get through that process of educating the reviewer, then there's other feedback that's given that tends to help further explore topics that may not be fully dived into the paper. And when a reviewer may ask you a question that, hey, you need to clarify this, maybe in your head it makes sense because you're the one that's formulating this new concepts, these new ideas, but someone else is reviewing it, it doesn't fully it's not fully transpire in the paper. So I think that you have to kind of get through the review process. Maybe it doesn't hurt to, Tristan might clarify, it doesn't hurt to reach out to the editor, and then educate the reviewer through the peer review process if you're lucky to make it through that. So just a few thoughts that I wanted to add from where my mic was cutting before.
Tom's on the call. Tom, did you want to provide some insight, like to the piece that you referenced? The Kirshner.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you know, I'm going to be 76 next in a couple of weeks. So I'm thinking back. I have a long history in the field, but one of my professors at Syracuse was Richard Clark, who published many seminal theoretical papers, and you know, got into the famous, of course, Clark-Cosmo debate that I think is still taught in graduate schools. I'm not sure. But, and then I think about other papers like classic papers, Merrill's First Principles of Instruction, Stephen Downes' Connectivism. So, you know, there are good examples out there. But it's rare for a graduate student, and I congratulate Enilda to publish these kinds of things, unless you really aim for that from the get-go. And that's something I've worked with my doctoral students. Most of them in the last 20 years have done design-based research, and we give them a structure. Basically, their dissertation would consist of 5 or 6 publishable articles. One would be a literature review. Another would be a theoretical framework, and that's your theory contribution. And then there'd be 2 or 3 articles about cycles of the design-based research project itself. And finally, a paper that would be, what does this all mean, written for practitioners and ideally published in a practitioner journal. So we, my colleagues and I at Georgia, who've been involved in design-based research or educational design research for quite a few years, have really promoted this idea of students writing a theoretical framework paper during their doctoral studies. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Another question that we received prior was this idea of whether empirical manuscripts carry different weight into theoretical manuscripts in the tenure and promotion process. I know that that may be a question that some may have as you're, you know, making your way through the tenure track. And I have gone through the tenure and promotion process at 2 different institutions. One was an R1 teaching intensive institution, and one is an R3 teaching intensive institution and R1 research intensive institution. Comparing the 2 experiences, it was not something that carried any weight difference in terms of assessment of my work. And I actually had to go back today to check our rubric. We actually have a rubric where I am now. It's not like a guessing game. And I had to go back to our rubric, and sure enough, it did not mention any difference between empirical and theoretical manuscripts. It did mention a difference in terms of theoretical or empirical conference presentations. So they did mention something about conference presentations have to be research-based, or at least some of them have to be research-based. But in terms of publication, there was not a difference in terms of the weight that a manuscript has for tenure and promotion. I don't know if the other panelists have similar experiences or anyone that's in the call, but I just figure I'd put that out there.
On my end, I think there's not so much a differentiation between theoretical and empirical, or development for that matter of fact. It's what's the purpose and what's the impact. They're really looking at impact, and that can be measured from number of citations for that paper, or the journal it was published in, or some indicators of that there's a lot of interest in that. And so I think I think that's the bigger picture, is if there's people drawn to it, or there's some kind of impact that's measurable. Again, there's different ways to do that, but I think that's what they're, for a paper that would stand out as one that is more prominent in the portfolio of publications, that's what we would look at. Stephen, I don't know, what's your situation like?
My situation, thank you for asking. My situation is that we don't really discriminate between different, you might say, like genres of types of publications, theoretical or empirical or qualitative, quantitative, or whatever else. We more just look at what journals they get published in, and things, all the classic stuff we talk about now, impact factors and other more traditional indices of quality publication outlet, like rejection rates and clout in the field and editorial boards and so on. So it's really kind of like wide open. If you can publish scholarship of any kind that gets accepted into what we consider to be pretty good journals, tier 1, tier 2 journals, really people don't care here. And so it's very nice that way. Although I will say I do have some colleagues who have expressed some concern over the years that at their institutions it's been harder for them to have their theoretical work appreciated maybe the same way their empirical stuff does, but I can't say that's like a strong trend I've heard. I know it does happen. I have one colleague like it. I probably shouldn't name institutions, but there are some where I know it's been a little bit of a question, and so one would want to go in, I think, to taking on a new position at a college or university. It might not be bad to know kind of the rules of the game going in, in terms of what is like treated as a quality scholarship and not, and so on, and just kind of have your eyes open to those kinds of things. By the way, someone asked about other examples, and I'm wondering, I have a couple slides that just, I don't have a lot of examples, but I've never used the tray on this before, so I don't know if I'm able to do this or not, but I wonder, so can you see slides on there?
See a lake.
You see just a lake. Well, that's not what I was hoping to show. It's a very nice lake, but it's probably not what we need to talk about.
Is it because you selected the wrong window to share?
Yeah, maybe I just couldn't figure out where the other window was. Okay, well, so let me get out of that so we don't waste our time looking at that lake.
If you click share on the top right corner, a top window will show, and it will select, and it will show you which screens you can choose from to share.
Okay, so I thought it was going to be on Zoom, and so I didn't look in advance, and so I didn't do any advanced training or to tutor myself in this. Okay, so let's see if I can just stop sharing, and I'll just say a couple things. So do you still see the lake?
No.
No. Good. Okay, sorry about that. So a couple there. So I just want to say I think there's some different functions of theoretical work in the field. I'll just go run through this briefly and give you like one example each. Sometimes theory offers frameworks for scholarship, and I think that's a lot of what we've been talking about. Like if you're going to be conducting research or other kinds of scholarly projects, it just gives you some kind of frame of reference for doing it, and I think that's one of the main reasons I think that's very helpful. There's a lot of examples of that you can see floating around. I think there's other frameworks that I think have been very useful and interesting for more practical work. And there I will mention like Patrick Parrish and Brent Wilson in our field, who have done work in the area of aesthetics and transformational learning, and have published a lot of stuff over the years in journals like Education Technology and ETR&D, that I think, well, what they did there was really useful for practitioners, I think. And so that's just one example from that area. But I think there's also a lot of theoretical work that can just do rigorous critical analysis and clarify the nature of ideas. And so there's a colleague of mine named Jack Martin, who's at Simon Fraser University in Canada for many years, who did a lot of really good work like that. He was in education and also psychology, and did stuff along the lines of agency and other work, and just really brilliant work in clarifying things and showing the limitations of ideas. And then a fourth area is, you might think of it as like a subversive function. Like theory can have this function of being sort of like a radical move, trying to shift things in new directions. And I think that's one of the important functions of theory as well, that we probably don't play up enough, but it's super important, I think. And so a colleague of mine, Martin Packer, some of you may remember him from the qualitative world. He's done a lot of stuff, education and psychology along the lines of qualitative research, and has done really good stuff on critiques of schooling and critiques of our theories of the way we think about cognitive phenomena like transfer and so on, and try to move things in new directions. That and he published these people publish articles in the best journals of the Journal of Learning Sciences, Educational Psychologist, Adult Education Quarterly, and many others. And so I think these are some of the most important and interesting contributions out there. And those are some examples of the kind of things that I think would be helpful. So.
Would you, should we go back and, I didn't address the question about tips and advice for those who are thinking about, what do we wish journal reviewers would know about how to provide feedback for theoretical manuscripts? I honestly have struggled with this. I have had several invited reviewers reject a paper because it's theoretical and says it's not what ETR&D does, and I've simply thanked them for their consideration, and I go to another reviewer. What I end up having to do is when I have, if I do it or one of the assistant editors invites somebody to review, I usually have them couch the invitation saying, this is a theoretical paper and we do accept these, and if you have questions, let us know. But we talk about, I don't know, I think sometimes reviewers, depends on the reviewer, sometimes they struggle, they don't know how to review it. Research papers they know how to review, but the theoretical papers they don't know. Manuscripts they don't have a way to approach that. So I will work with them and give them some guidelines. But at the end of the day, I think again, what I look at a series of questions. Then the questions I really ask is, what's the rationale for this theory or this conceptual piece? In other words, why is it needed? Also, what's their purpose in writing it? Also, I look for their impact of their work. What are they trying to accomplish? And so I think those three things are the kind of the big questions I kind of give as guidance to someone reviewing the paper, because it's not following the typical form for a research manuscript. But I am very much encouraging people to come with theoretical pieces. One of the things that, and this might be more telling about me than anything else, but you know, I often ask, why is this a PhD? Why is it not a an EDD or a Tech D or whatever? But we are philosophers of sorts, and philosophers think about ideas, and theories are ideas, and they have logic to them. And so I think as we talk about those things, I think there's more value than, I think actually developing theory is harder in a certain sense. And Stephen, I don't know, you do this more than I do, but I think the theory development and construction and idea is probably more challenging than just doing a straight out empirical study, an experimental design study where there's accepted ways to do it and so forth. So anyway, so that's my thought is rationale, purpose, and impact, and making sure those are clear. And by the way, you can have a theory you're proposing, or you can propose a challenge of theories. I mean, there's all kinds of different constructs or different types of papers that are non-empirical that I think are valuable. And I actually would encourage folks that are more into their career to take on those, because if they're already a professor or they've already got tenure, they can take the risk and time to develop these areas that are not super clear, super easy. Plus, it takes time to assimilate others' ideas and bring them in. And so I think that work is very, very important.
I wonder if there's a need for journals, I mean, not to put anything additional on the plate of editors or others, editorial board members. But I wonder if there's a need for more clarification or guidance, like someone was mentioning in the, Ella was mentioning in the chat, any guidelines that can be given to reviewers. And I have reviewed for several journals in which there is some sort of differentiation between an empirical paper and a paper that is more conceptual. And then we also see like the International Journal of the Science for Learning, which focuses on design cases, and Dr. Elizabeth Bowling, they have their whole guidelines on how to review a design case. So I don't know. I think that perhaps that this is a conversation that has to happen within editorial boards and journals.
Daniela asked in the chat if there are any written guidelines anywhere for reviewers who need to, who can refer to as if they're assigned a theoretical paper. All right, any other questions that the attendees would like to ask?
I don't have a question. Oh, sorry, someone was going to ask a question. Sorry.
Yeah, are there any examples from like feminist critique to a particular instructional design theory, or like indigenous knowledge on a particular instructional design concept that has come forward as a conceptual or theoretical papers in any of the panelists' sites?
I guess I can jump in here. I recently wrote a paper, well, actually it was like 1.5 years ago. And I don't know if it necessarily is a theoretical paper. It's highly influenced by feminist theory. And it's really an autoethnography, which is a research methodology. So it kind of connects feminist theory and autoethnography, and it comes together to critique in a positive way, I believe, the instructional design field. And I'm happy to share it, but it really is grounded on autoethnography, on feminist autoethnography. So I'll just leave it there. I think that there are other pieces that have come. I'm blanking out on the name of the book right now, but just recently my co-author and I published a book chapter in an open access book, and there were some interesting pieces in there that were connected to indigenous theories. If you reach, I'll put my email in the chat, and then you can reach out to me if that's okay.
I'm checking out the link that Tom sent. Thank you, Tom.
Other questions?
One thing I'll throw out at I don't know what other people are thinking, but I remember, I don't know, my first year out of after graduating, and I had these ideas, and so sometimes all I can say is sometimes you have ideas you want to share, and just sharing them by themselves is, I mean, you can do that. Whether people want to believe you or not is one thing, or whether you have gravitas or whatever. But I think having ideas to share is good, a good place to start. And then I think really what ends up happening is as you have an idea, then you look for evidence or theories that support that idea. And so I think that notion of you're coming up with ideas, what you want to be careful with is coming up with an idea that has already been espoused by someone. And if it is, that it actually gives you some clout. So referencing that kind of work. I know there's been work in our field or in an applied field done in the 50s and 60s that gets recycled, or the idea comes up in our time. I'm trying to think of the examples now. It's been with some European colleagues I've chatted with about this, but like for example, this flipped classroom, that is not new. That was published back in the 60s. And we call it new, and that's fine because it really wasn't on the forefront, or it didn't have that name flipped. But I think that's part of being a philosopher of sorts, a researcher of sorts, is having ideas and then looking for evidence or challenging those ideas. Again, critical thinking is what a philosopher does, or one of the skills, and then linking it to other people's work. And sometimes finding people's work that is counterintuitive to what your ideas are is good. I mean, all these things, it's about taking the time to process ideas and thought. And so I would encourage that's, again, a lot of fun for a lot of us. And so even if you just start with an idea and then start bouncing it off people, and then having a framework for trying to generate pros or support for or against. I mean, again, this is perhaps a course way to approach it, but I remember my coursework and they were like, okay, just write your lit review, and no one really told me. I had to kind of figure out what I needed to do and why you did it. But nonetheless, start with your ideas and then start to link them. What have other people said, and what are other ideas, and so forth. So I think those are fun places to play in. And then also, I think at conferences, presenting those ideas are important. I think that's a conference venue is a very good place to have a smaller group to have those chats and conversations. And so I think there's value in that in our field, and not just here's a research study and the findings, also the implications. But if you also want to tie into theory, when you do a research study, then really take the time and work to link it to current theories or go back and try to tie that in. I think that can be another way to then start to link empirical study to theoretical study. Just a couple approaches that you might want to consider.
I have a question for Susan. You mentioned the subversive function of theoretical papers. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think I look at it that way because I kind of feel like in some ways I've been on the margins of the fields I've been part of, like my whole career since the late 90s. Of wherever I thought the energy was, and the ideas I wanted to try to promulgate and the problems I wanted to solve were always ones that left me outside of the mainstream. And so I felt like I was always a sort of counterculture person. Not that I do anything really like exciting, but and I'm not necessarily, I don't mean necessarily like socio-politically subversive, although that's fine too, but like just in terms of like challenging ideas that are maybe problematic in the field, and like maybe a well-accepted assumption that seems like it's become now passed along to generations of scholars just through like without even thinking about it in the textbooks and in the journal articles and in the classes that we teach and the ways we talk about things. And I sometimes stand over on one side and look at with a certain angle that says, this is like a problematic assumption, I think. And if we blew this assumption up, this would change a lot of the way we think about the way we conduct certain kinds of research, or the way we think about the relationship between technology and learners, or something like that. And so I guess that's kind of like, that's sort of like a propositional, like an abstract way to talk about it. But practically speaking, I think Jean Lave and Etienne Wenger were doing some work kind of like this in a very academic way when they were challenging like Jean Lave did all this work in the 80s, where she was basically this kind of like academic assault on the establishment of cognitive psychology and cognitivism, right? And she was coming at it from this anthropological sort of participational neo-Vygotskian perspective with some other influences that was just really groundbreaking. And it shook a lot of things up. And look at how many references that has in like Google Scholar. I mean, it's like just extraordinary number of people have cited that work. Whether they love it or they hate it, it generated all kinds of conversations. And I think that's the best part of scholarship, is not getting too comfortable, not getting too like too easy to just accept a bunch of tacit assumptions, or maybe explicit assumptions that have become sort of tacitized, so to speak, and to stay on our toes and challenge each other. And I think those are really interesting and important things to do. I think there's a lot of other examples I guess we could talk about. I do this with phenomenology sometimes, because phenomenologists are usually on the margins also. In psychology, phenomenology has been a very subversive kind of dissident movement. And so my friends and I in that domain talk a lot about these kinds of things, you know. How can we do interesting phenomenological studies that help us rethink things like a colleague of mine does work in phenomenology, and what would it be, certain diagnoses for children, and I can't think of exactly the one she's done, but she basically is saying things like, we think about people as if they're just a mind that just walks around in space somehow. Like we don't even study their embodiedness and other aspects, the gendered nature of them. Like how was embodiment and gender involved in things like the way we diagnose people and children and so on? And so she's more in clinical psychology, right? And she's like doing really interesting work that challenges all these assumptions and crosses over boundaries in ways that other people don't do. And I think theory is really helpful for doing that. It doesn't have to be phenomenology. It could be a lot of different areas. But boy, it's powerful when you do it the right way.
Thank you. We only have a couple minutes, so if anybody had one last question or would like to wrap up, or if anybody has one last thought before we adjourn.
Well, I'm gonna share before my doggy here gets more, ready to leave the room. But I was just gonna say, I put in the chat, read and write with intention, and that was primarily thinking through the graduate students who have joined the call today. As I said before, I felt like being in my dissertation was probably the most time I've had to sit down and read, and I wanted to read not only in our field, but I wanted to read in other fields, bring that into my work, and that has proven to be very beneficial to me throughout my career, because I'm always looking at the literature, not only that we do in educational technology, but things that are being done in other areas that can influence our work. So I would say to graduate students is, take time to read through the literature review process. Do not jump just straight to writing. Take time to look at the literature in its full extent. Create outlines in which you can, look at the different concepts and frameworks that you're observing in the literature, and perhaps see if there's opportunity to come up with new innovative ideas to theoretical concepts, and and work with, partner up with other faculty who may have experience in that area, and seek out guidance. I feel like I had a lot of conversations with my dissertation advisor. Literally, we would just sit and talk, and that's how new ideas, new concepts new theories came to life. Sometimes doing that in a vacuum or by yourself is really challenging. And so exploring and talking, that helps to generate new knowledge.
Yeah, I like the idea in wrapping up on my end, taking the time to think and process and converse and challenge each other. Those are all fun activities, obviously, and it's sometimes hard because sometimes the output is not super clear, or you're exploring and there's not a publication specifically that you're working on or a study you're conducting. But I think those things, I think of a sabbatical as time to, that's when you can explore and take the time, and productivity is not the goal. Thought and understanding and ideation and critique, those are kind of the goal in and of themselves, or could be the immediate goal perhaps. But yeah, I think those are very important, and encourage that to continue. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all of your valuable contributions and insights. Let me stop recording.